Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is Due Time, and today I'm going to talk about how I got my first job as a software engineer. I'm going to tell you about my life career-wise in my early 20s, how I ended up transitioning to computer science, how I prepared for the interviews, and how I found that first job. All right, so let's get into it. So I graduated high school a while back in Dallas, Texas, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So I ended up talking to one of my friends, and he said he wanted to be a nurse. So I was thinking, why don't I do that too? So I started looking into it, and then I figured I actually wanted to be a doctor. So I decided for the longest time that I was going to go to medical school and be an emergency room physician. So that's what I had in my head. And I ended up going to school on and off for several years, and I ended up actually never applying to medical school. I just didn't go down that route. At some point, I ended up playing poker quite a bit. So I started playing poker at house games. With friends, $10, $20 on the table. And actually before that, I started playing online. And so I started playing these house games and online poker. And then eventually, I got this job as a pharmacy tech, right? And honestly, I was so excited about poker that the very first second I got paid, I took that check and I drove straight to WinStar Casino on the border of Oklahoma and Dallas, Texas. That $200 check, took it up there, and I lost my money within the first hour. So just like that, it was gone. So I was in love with poker, and every time I got paid, I went to WinStar. And I was losing money for quite some time, probably several months. I think it ended up taking maybe 9 months to a year before I finally broke even and made all my money back. At that point, I ended up getting better at poker, so I just kept on making money, kept on going there as much as I could, and over the course of a year and a half, I made $65,000. And that felt like all the money in the world because, me and all my friends, we were basically making minimum wage. So for me to just, I'm making money playing a card game. This ought to be impossible. And plus, people categorize poker as gambling, and it is gambling, but people put it in the same category as slot machines and blackjack. So everyone was convinced that there was no possible way in hell I was actually gonna come out ahead at poker. And so, playing poker was really fun. I've got some interesting stories about that. So at some point, I pretty much just weaned myself off of poker. It was extremely addicting, and I wanted to start focusing more on getting an actual career started. So I stopped playing it, started focusing more on school, ended up transferring to UT Austin, and there I studied computer engineering. I had in my mind that I was going to get this degree in computer engineering and apply to medical school at the same time. But as I was going through these courses through computer engineering, I kept just researching more about my potential career path as either an electrical engineer or a software engineer. It started to become a lot more enticing to just go that route than to go to medical school. Even though doctors are going to make more money, it obviously requires way too much schooling. And at the time, I kind of really just wanted to get my career started. So at some point, I taught myself iOS development just because I wanted to learn something more practical. So I ended up taking this course online, and I had to try it quite a few times because it was really boring. It was a really boring course. The cool part is that once I finally got through that course and I started working on my own app, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot more fun. Now it was the exact opposite. Whereas before, when I was trying to teach myself iOS development, it was almost like torture trying to make myself learn it. But then once I started working on my own app, it was like I couldn't get away from it. It's like I had to remind myself to eat, sleep, and drink water because I just kept on wanting to make this app. So this app I made was just a toy app I put in the App Store just so I could have something to show off to people. So after I did that, I felt pretty good about myself, and I basically was really kind of done with school. So after that, we moved to the Bay Area, the tech capital of the world. My wife already had a job at a tech company, so she transferred to the office there, and I started looking for a job in San Francisco. And this was the fun part. Okay, I had to figure out how I was gonna get my first job in tech. So there's two fronts I had to focus on. First is getting an interview, but at the same time, I had to prepare for those interviews. So at these tech companies, they ask you behavioral and technical questions. So you had to go in front of a whiteboard and start writing out code to solve this algorithmic problem they give you. And so I've always been aware of this website called leetcode.com, where you can answer questions that they're likely to give you in an interview. And so that really helped a lot. So there was a number of things I did to try and get an interview. For one, I went to meetups. I went meetup.com. So I ended up networking with a lot of people just to get to know people in the area. At the same time, I found this meetup group that was perfect because it allowed me to both network with people and practice these LeetCode problems. So you would go to this group and they would solve these LeetCode questions in front of the classroom. You would basically volunteer to go up there and they'd say, okay, do you want an easy problem, medium, or hard? And then they would give you a random problem. You had to solve it right then and there in front of everyone. But you only had to go up to the front of the classroom if you volunteered. And I never volunteered to do that, but I took a lot of notes. I ended up meeting this guy and we ended up hanging out a bit and he ended up giving me some advice. He said, leave no stone unturned. And so that means you really got to put yourself out there. So I really took that to heart, leave no stone unturned. So there was a couple of slightly unconventional things I had to do to make sure I left no stone unturned. For one, that meant going to an MIT career fair. This was really limited only to people who graduated from MIT and their friends, I suppose. So the guy that I met at one of the meetups, he graduated from MIT. So I went to this MIT career fair and I was dreading going to it, but I made myself go because I knew I couldn't just pass up on, I couldn't afford to pass up on really any opportunity. So I went there and I ended up talking to these recruiters and it was extremely embarrassing because I didn't have a background. I didn't have any professional software engineering experience and I also didn't have a degree from MIT. So they're like, like, what are you doing here? But I ended up forcing myself to talk to a lot of people just to break the ice and to get my confidence juices flowing. So I ended up leaving there and really nothing came of it, but I'm glad I went anyway. So the other thing I did was I ended up paying $75 to cold message people on LinkedIn. Okay, if you're not friends with people on LinkedIn, if you're not directly connected to them, LinkedIn will charge you to message them, especially if they're a third connection. So that meant that I had to pay about $10 each time I wanted to send someone a message. All right, so that was pretty extreme, but I figured I'd try it anyway. And so what I did was I made a script that I used to basically send to everyone, but I made part of the script tailored specifically to that person or company that I was messaging. So by a stroke of luck, one of the software engineers who I messaged actually replied back and she said that she liked my message and she wanted to have a phone call. So we talked for a bit and she grilled me on these iOS topics and she asked a bunch of questions and I answered pretty much every single one of them. I was very proud of myself. They ended up giving me a second interview. So I had a second phone interview. This was more of an official phone interview with one of her colleagues. And so this guy ended up asking me some questions, this LeetCode algorithm question, but this was an easy one. So they ended up inviting me on site to their headquarters. And so my wife and I, we were living actually just a 15-minute walk away from the headquarters, which was pretty convenient. So I go there, I get interviewed by the people there. Everyone seemed nice and friendly. I was pretty nervous the whole time, but they made me feel relaxed. And I liked the benefits that they had there, the amenities. They had like free Cheerios and free avocado toast for breakfast, which was really nice. That's the culture there in San Francisco. And so, yeah, it was pretty cool. And I felt like I did pretty good in the interviews, but I wasn't quite sure. I felt like maybe I could have done better here and there. So I was still pretty nervous afterwards. And at the same time, I had interviews at these other companies as well, kind of like before this and after this. So I was juggling quite a number of opportunities. There was 3 opportunities in total. And so one by one, these opportunities, these companies rejected me except this one company in particular. So I ended up getting lucky with that and they ended up extending me an offer. And so the recruiter called me and he let me know that he was going to email me the offer and I had 24 hours to sign it. And so they call that an exploding offer. And so that was pretty much it. That's how I got my first job in tech. But there's a couple other things to note. So let's talk about negotiation. I highly recommend that most people negotiate anytime you get a job offer, but there are a few times where you may not want to do that. And this was actually precisely that time where I could not afford to negotiate, because one of the central tenets of negotiation is your ability to walk away. If you can't walk away from the negotiation table, then you don't truly have any power. Now, you can bluff your way through it. You can pretend that you can walk away, but if they call your bluff, then you're going to have to face the consequences. And so for me, I really had zero power to walk away from the table, because on the one hand, I needed the money. So it's not like I could just pass up on that job and just, float my way to the next one. Like, I needed money as soon as I possibly could. Secondly, I didn't have any prior career experience. So this would be my first official career experience in tech. And so it's not like I could just pass up on the offer and then say, hey, let me go and get another job, because it was very hard to even get an interview in the first place. So getting this first job, it was just extremely important. Like, I could not afford to pass this up. But there's another point with it, which is that to say, I kind of feel like I almost did negotiate in a way, because I kind of did like a pre-negotiation. The recruiter, before he told me that he was extending me an offer, when we were on site, he asked me what would I be expecting in an offer. And I told him what I was expecting, and this was based on research that I had done, a ton of extensive research into salaries for that company. And so I gave him a number that was about right around the range, or 10% above what I thought I could get. And he told me, no way. He said, no way he could offer me that. And so that kind of actually made me feel good, because if he would have instantly said, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good number, then that means I know I would have lowballed myself. But he said no way, which means that I gave him the number right at the top of the range of what I knew I could get. And so when he gave me the offer, it was about 5% below what I had asked for. And so that made me feel like I had pretty much already negotiated the offer, and I was happy with that, and I took it. And so that's how I got my first job in tech. And so in my next video, or a video down the line, I'll talk to you guys about how I ended up leaving my first job in tech, why I ended up leaving my first job in tech. Okay, so if you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe. This really helps out the channel. Like, leave a comment and let me know your thoughts on getting your first job in the career field that you're in. Thanks, and see you next time.